Yes, and the table staff make sure that the documentation is there. You can actually come with it, you don't have to stand so far away. Mr. Fanning, we will now proceed with the process of the swearing in. This process is a requirement in terms of Section 107 of the Constitution of the Republic of South Africa, 1996, which provides that, and I quote, before members begin to perform their functions in the legislature, they must swear or affirm faithfulness to the Republic and obedience to the Constitution in accordance with Schedule 2. The oath or affirmation that you will make today is prescribed in Schedule 2 of the Constitution of the Republic of South Africa, 1996. The oath is prepared in English, Afrikaans, isiXhosa, and Sesotho. You have a choice of making the oath in any of the above languages. You also have a choice whether to make an oath or an affirmation. The difference between an oath and an affirmation is that with an oath, you swear in the name of God, whereas in the affirmation, you simply affirm your faithfulness as prescribed for in the Constitution. Mr. Fanning, I now call upon you to make the choice, an oath or affirmation. An oath. I will now, you have already received a copy of the oath with you. Thank you so much to the table staff. Mr. Fanning, can you please read your oath?
I, Marky Fanning, hereby swear that I will be faithful to the Republic of South Africa and will obey, respect and uphold the Constitution and all other laws of the Republic, and I solemnly promise to perform my functions as a member of the legislature of the province of the Eastern Cape to the best of my ability. So help me God.
Thank you so much, Honorable Member. You have now been sworn in as an Honorable Member of this august legislature, and I wish you every success in your endeavor. There will be 2 copies that you will please sign for us. One of the copies will be handed back to the legislature, the other one will be in your possession. That is basically your certificate authenticating as a member of the provincial legislature. I will now request the acting chief whip of the official opposition, Honorable Dr. Klutzer, to do the welcoming remarks, and then thereafter the chief whip of the legislature, 2 minutes each. Over to yourself.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. Honourable Fanning, as the spokesperson of the official opposition in the House just for today, it gives me a great pleasure to welcome you, not just as a member, but as a colleague. When we are together as members in this House, we strive towards working together and making decisions that are in the best interests of all the people in the Eastern Cape, this beautiful province. In this House, there are no backbenchers. We all get a time to speak, and we all get a time at that podium. My advice, make every second count. It is our pleasure to welcome you.
Thank you so much, Acting Chief Whip, Honourable Dr. Klutzer. I will now hand over to the Chief Whip of the legislature. Can we just have the Honourable Member now coming to the side of the podium? Yes, yeah, just so that now you can face the members. Yeah. You can also come around him, and I'm sure I don't even see the legislature photography.
Flower can be flower pot.
I will also get into the picture now.
Thank you so much, Honorable Speaker. Thanks for the opportunity given to us. I was informed by our commitment to the struggles of the people, especially the people of the Eastern Cape, that we would deploy such an experienced honorable member to be part of us, so that in our quest for changing the lives of the people for the better, we have such people of your caliber to come and be part of us and ensure that this parliament continues to be an activist parliament, and it speaks to the interest of the people at all material times. You would then recall that this is the year of decisive action in advancing the interests of the people, which then we believe, Honorable Makifeni, you will not fail at any given moment in fulfilling that huge responsibility. In your shoulders now you carry the hopes of the people of this province and the people of Nelson Mandela. We should then expect that you will not be a disgrace, but rather a blessing to those people of Nelson Mandela, that when you were brought at this level, you really lived up to the expectations and you did not disappoint. As the African National Congress, we welcome you wholeheartedly and wish you all the best in ensuring that all our endeavors see the light of day. Thank you so much, Honorable Speaker.
Thank you, Honourable Member. You may be seated, Honourable Member. I'm sure the table staff will take you to your seat. And thank you to Honourable Bonyana and Honourable Delanga for assisting you. Before we proceed, Honourable Members, my apologies. Let me just acknowledge that in our midst, I was going to do it afterwards, but I think let me do it now. We have, as part of our guests of the Office of the Chief Whip, we have the Chief Whip and the Whips from the Winnie Madikizela local municipality that is joining us here for a week. And they are here to look and to assess also, and also to learn in terms of effective oversight. I know that today they had a session with the chair of chairs, and yesterday they were in the portfolio committees, so they will be making a turn surely to different portfolio committees. We wish them well, and they will also be taken to a few of our historical landmarks that we are having here in Bishop for that. With us also to acknowledge the Independent Electoral Commission, which will be introduced at the appropriate time. We have a delegation when we will do so. You are welcome, gentlemen. You will be introduced at that particular point in time. For all of those, it's always, I think, legislature staff is always sitting there in the corner. You can never see, but you can always hear them. So to those who are legislature staff or from government, you are also welcome to this one. Honourable members, to move on, I have been informed by the Multi-Party Whips Committee when they took a decision that no motions and member statements will be moved in this plenary. However, we are all aware that one of our permanent delegates to the NCOP, who was representing the EFF, has deceased. The chairperson of the NCOP has written to my office requesting the legislature to fill the vacancy in accordance with Section 62, subsection 5 of the Constitution 1996 and Section 2 of the National Council of Provinces Act 1997. It is on this basis that we are expected to pass a motion without notice in order for the House to resolve who will be appointed as a permanent delegate of the Eastern Cape Province to replace the deceased member. I have received notice from the Chief Whip to move such and will therefore give an opportunity to dispense with that matter now. Over to you, Honourable Chief Whip.
Thanks, Honorable Speaker. You know, we getting into this, of course, concern that the honorable members of the Economic Freedom Fighters are not part of the proceedings today. The reasons best known to them, and it is uncalled for because we are to read a motion that affects them directly and the province of the Eastern Cape. However, with or without them, we are ready to proceed. Their absence makes no difference. Madam Speaker, I move in terms of Rule 34, subsection 4, and 130 of the standing rules that this House resolves to appoint the following person as a permanent delegate of the province of the Eastern Cape, in accordance with Section 62, subsection 5 of the Constitution of the Republic of South Africa, 1996, and Section 2 of the National Council of Provinces, Permanent Delegate Vacancies Act. 1997, Act number 17 of 1997. Ms. Noluvuyo Tafeni. I so move, Honorable Speaker. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chief Whip. I think you've actually raised a very important matter that will have to be taken into consideration for future events. But honourable members, does this a motion without notice? Thank you. Honourable members, we shall now move to our business for the day. This is a sitting in terms of Rule 87 of the Standing Rules, whereby a person who is not a member of the legislature may address the legislature if invited by the Speaker after consultation with the Works Committee. A representative from the IEC have joined us in the sitting to make a presentation on the Electoral Amendment Act as well as the voting trends, focusing on low voter turnout and challenges faced during the registrations, the online and the open days, and the actual voting day. Furthermore, we are supposed to get an update on the latest report flowing from the Census 2022. However, we have now learned from the provincial management of Stats SA that the report will only be made public around July of this year. We would gladly fit into one of our plenaries a slot for them to present such critical information to us. Honourable members, the House will conduct its business at this stage in the format of the Committee of the Whole House. So I shall now request the Sergeant-at-Arms to drop the mace. Thank you, Sergeant-at-Arms. Allow me therefore at this stage to acknowledge and invite the representative from the IEC, Mr. Masindi Moseane, to formally address the House and introduce himself. I also know that he is with Mr. Nodada, that is the Provincial IEC Communications Officer. Over to you, Mr. Moseane. There's just a note for information, honourable members, that you have all received a hard copy. Unfortunately, we tried, but our system is not up and running. So presentation that will be done, you all should have it on your desk. One day we will get, hopefully this term, get rid of all of this paper, the secretary. That is, but yeah, it's not here to Uru. Over to you, Mr. Moseane.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker, and to the various chief whips that are in the House, as well as honorable members of the House. Let me greet you in the name of the Electoral Commission. My name is Masindi Moseane. Yes, it's not a lady. Well, that's a vendor name, and the Venda. I should have greeted you yesterday. I'm not alone. I'm with Sanda Nodata, who is our Provincial Communications Officer. I stand before you today to address you on various electoral matters on behalf of the Provincial Electoral Officer, Ms. Kayakazi Makudumana, who was not able to make it today in this house because of the number of commitments that we have. Honorable Speaker, I understand the presentation has been circulated, and I will speak from my laptop, but honorable members will follow from the presentations provided. Let me just give a brief overview of where we are as the Electoral Commission within the province, considering that we expect an election to take place in less than a year from now. The elections in the Eastern Cape obviously take place within the backdrop of our 6 districts, 710 wards, and plus minus 4,809 voting stations that I will delve more on later. But we are currently in our planning phase. And this is where we look at legislation, amendments, if needs be. We look at our delimitation, our staffing for voting stations, and so forth, to ensure that by the time we go to the registration weekend, we have all our ducks in a row. In terms of the election cycle, Section 49 of the Constitution makes reference to the term of office for officials that are elected to the National Assembly. And that term is for 5 years. And when that term expires or the National Assembly is dissolved, the President must then call and set a date of elections by proclamation. So it is not the IEC that sets the date of elections, but it is the prerogative of the President. And from the date of the expiry of a term or a dissolution, the IEC then has a window period of plus minus 90 days to ensure that an election takes place. So if you look at the national elections of 2019 that took place on the 8th of May, it means that we expect the term of the current National Assembly or Parliament to expire on the 8th of May 2024, meaning that any day from the 9th of May 2024 and 90 days thereafter, which will expire on the 8th of August 2024, there must be an election. So the President, in consultation with the Electoral Commission, will then look at a suitable date, and then the President will then make a proclamation. Perhaps I should add that as a statutory body mandated with strengthening democracy in this country, the Electoral Commission, our preparations are always in such a way that we are ready to manage an election at the earliest possible date, depending on which date the President proclaims. Honorable members, you'll also be aware that the 2024 national and provincial elections will be different, in that when you look at some of the amendments that have been made recently, we are going to have, for the first time in this country, independent candidates are able to contest and for a seat at the National Assembly as well as the provincial legislatures. Without wasting time, if one looks at the background, we all know by now, I think it's common knowledge, that the New Nation movement challenged the constitutionality of the Electoral Act in as far as it allows independents to contest elections. If you read the Constitution, I think Section 19 of the Constitution says that any person can stand for office and occupy that office if elected. However, when you come to the Electoral Act and the provisions that were there, the Electoral Act only made provisions for parties to contest elections. So having won that, and the Constitutional Court deeming the Electoral Act unconstitutional in that area, Parliament was given 24 months to remedy the defects in the Electoral Act. Now, let's look at what the significant amendments or changes that have been made to the Electoral Act and the impact they have. Again, looking at the Constitution, we know that the National Assembly is made up of 400 seats. The Chapter 1 of the Constitution actually suggests that we must have an electoral system that is proportional in nature. I think that is reiterated in Section 46 of the Constitution. So in making the amendments to the Electoral Act, the people who were dealing with the amendments had to make sure that in including independents, the system remains proportional in nature. So looking at the National Assembly, for example, with the 400 seats that are there, parties would know that when they contested elections, they would submit a list, a PR list, to contest the 200 seats. And they would also submit a regional list to contest the balance of the 200 seats at the National Assembly. So in the coming elections, those 400 seats have been divided as follows. There will still be 200 seats that will be contested by parties only. And a further 200 seats of those in the National Assembly will then be contested via regional seats. The difference being that in the first 200 seats, only parties can contest. And in the second 200 seats that are regional seats, parties and independents will be able to contest for those seats. And then looking at the provincial legislatures, the amendments are in such a way that both parties as well as independents would be able to contest those elections. Of course, there are some requirements that independents as well as parties that are not represented at either your provincial legislature or National Assembly must fulfill. Among others, I'll start with the regional seats. Where an independent decides to contest for a regional seat, the requirement is that there is a quota that they should be able to meet of signatures, or if I may use a simpler term, a quota of signatures of supporters proving that they have support to contest a seat in a particular region. Those quotas, as determined but not yet confirmed, are as follows. I'll focus on the Eastern Cape. A person who would want to contest as an independent in the Eastern Cape would have to first fulfill this requirement by submitting 11,656 signatures proving that they have support if they are to contest the Eastern Cape. Of course, the quota varies from region to region or province to province based on the number of registered voters and population in that area. And then those who wish to contest for provincial legislature as independents, in terms of the quota, they have to submit plus minus 4,627 signatures to contest in the Eastern Cape. Others are higher, others like in the Northern Cape are quite less. And this requirement will also apply to parties that are not represented currently in legislatures. So they will have to prove that they have support to contest in these areas. Secondly, for independents who are going to contest elections or for seats in provincial legislatures, those independents can only contest for seats in the province that they are registered in. Those, honorable members, are some of the changes or dynamics that will come into play when we go to the national and provincial elections of 2024. The IEC is currently finalizing modalities of how registration will happen, and some of those things. We will be rolling out training or briefings later in the year in terms of what the requirements are and how people would then contest or register to contest for these elections. Moving on from there, I will deal with where we are as the Electoral Commission currently in preparing for NPE 2024. Earlier in the year, we commenced with a delimitation process. That process takes place once the demarcation board has finalized matters pertaining to provincial boundaries and municipal boundaries. And e-delimitation looks at voting station boundaries within the various wards to ensure that localities that are there, settlements, new settlements, are catered for in terms of voting stations for the coming election. I will delve more on the numbers and the outcomes of that process later. We have also commenced with our recruitment process that we hope to finalize around June, July. Among others, we are busy with the process of recruiting area managers and voting station staff. And those that are recruited will, among others, in the months that I've mentioned, that is June and July, names of those who are successful will be tabled before the municipal party liaison committees to ensure that people we employ at our voting and registration stations are thoroughly vetted. We envisage that there will be 2 registration drives in the run-up to the elections next year. The first registration drive will be on the 18th and 19th of November, when we will open all our voting stations to afford citizens an opportunity to go out and register and also check their registration details, addresses, and all that. Then on the 3rd and 4th of February, we will also have a second registration weekend. And these 2 registration weekends will be supplemented by a campaign that is ongoing online in terms of encouraging young people particularly to use their phones and register without having to visit our local offices or the voting stations. And then we expect that once proclamation is done, sometime in February, the candidate nomination process will then ensue, and then with the election taking place any time between May and August 2024. The Electoral Commission, when we look at the Electoral Commissions Act, one of our responsibilities, even entrenched in the Constitution, is the maintenance of a credible voters' roll. And I guess today you cannot speak of a credible voters' roll without touching on a watershed moment in 2016 that is now called Tlokwe, where the Electoral Commission was requested to ensure that our voters' roll has addresses. Currently, when you look at the voters' roll in the country, it has plus minus 26 million voters. And one of the objectives that the IEC has is that by the time we go to elections, that number should at least be sitting around 27 million. In the province, we have a voters roll that currently has 3.2 million voters. And for this financial year, that is 2023-2024, we expect to add another 126,000 voters to that voters roll. And maybe I should add that by adding new voters, I'm not referring to people who are moving from one province to another. We are looking particularly for people who had not registered before, this being in the majority young people, and ensure that they become a part of our electoral processes by registering to vote. If you look at the presentation, I think on page 15, you will note there that currently in the Eastern Cape, when you look at the voters roll, and you look at the number of 18 and 19-year-olds that we have registered, we are sitting at plus minus 28,000. And when you look at the population statistics, I wish Stats SA was here today. We have noted that when we look at that age group, there's plus minus 200,000 young people in the Eastern Cape. And only just over 10% of them are on the voters roll. So we have a mammoth task as we work towards the coming elections, obviously in partnership with our other stakeholders like provincial legislature, traditional leaders, COPTA, to mention a few, Home Affairs, to ensure that in terms of the dynamics around getting those young people registered, making sure that they have the requirements, IDs and all that, we work together and address our voters' roll. I will not deal with the other age groups, but you will note that you will find it interesting that almost the majority of our voters, 765 to be precise, are people older than 60 years. And if we do not address the voters' roll now, excuse me for putting it this way, but these older people are actually, at the train station, and at some point they will be exiting our voters' roll. And that means that if this is not addressed now, there will be very few people that actually participate in our electoral democracy. And I will also, I think the page next to that looks at how we performed as the Electoral Commission in registering young people in the financial year that has now passed, 2022 and 2023. Our target in that financial year was to register 74,000 new voters. And of that 74,000, we managed to register 61,000 of those voters. There are a number of dynamics that determine why people register and eventually vote. Among others, we know there's voter apathy and other issues in our communities. We see it through the number of community protests that we have. But also, when working with the Department of Home Affairs, we also note that there are a number of young people that are applying for IDs, but some of those IDs do not reach those young people once approved and produced for them to be able to register. And honorable members, if you look at those figures, you must be mindful of the fact that these were achieved. I think we achieved 82% of what we had set out to do. And these were achieved without any registration weekend. The financial year that we're coming from was a non-financial year, so there was no registration weekend. This is solely achieved from our staff at local offices, partnering with stakeholders locally, going into schools, tertiary institutions, and working together to ensure that we find these young people and register them. So on that note, understanding that here I'm standing in the presence of leaders of communities and many civic formations. As the INC, we we encourage or we implore partnerships that would ensure that we, in this current financial year, we achieve and even surpass our registration figures. In the current financial year that we are in, that is on slide 17, that is just a summary of what we have achieved so far. We expected that in the first quarter of this year, we will be able to register plus minus 10% of those that we had targeted, the 126 that we had targeted. And in the second quarter, we will then try and increase that target to 20%. And in the third and fourth quarter, considering that we will have a registration weekend in each of those quarters, then our target will be 35%. I'm pleased to say that in the second month of this quarter, we are already sitting at close to 9% of that target, implying that by the end of June, at least, we would have achieved that which we have set out to do for this quarter. And one of the contributing factors to those results is the online registration campaigns that we have launched recently. And then in addressing the voters' roll in terms of addresses and making sure that each voter that is on the voters' roll has an address. If you look at 2019, 2021 and 2023, almost 137,000 of those on the voters' roll in the Eastern Cape, about 3% of those on the voters' roll did not have addresses, while 12% of those on the voters' roll had incomplete addresses. And this has slightly changed in 2021, where we had just about 119 voters that were on the voters' roll, but without addresses. And the incomplete addresses were actually drastically reduced to only less than 1% of voters on the voters' roll without addresses. And the status quo currently is that those without addresses only make up 95,000, or about 2% of voters on the voters' roll, while those with incomplete addresses make up just 1%. And I raise these figures because as the province and as South Africa generally, not every household has a formal address. And so it's been quite an arduous task ensuring that we actually find addresses of voters, especially those that had registered prior to 2003, and address the voters' roll. However, one of the things that the law has allowed and that has assisted in reducing these numbers is that those who do not have addresses on the voters' roll are still allowed to present themselves at a voting station to vote. So the fact that you do not have a voters' roll you do not have an address on the voters' roll does not exclude you from the electoral processes, especially if you are on a voters' roll. However, when you present yourself at a voting station, the requirement is that you must first provide the presiding officer with an address. And the presiding officer will then make a determination whether that address falls or qualifies you for a ballot in a particular election. Let me further elaborate in this way that, for instance, if you are in the Eastern Cape and you happen to be on the segment of a voters' roll in the Eastern Cape and without an address, and on voting day you present yourself at that voting station, but you provide an address from a different province, the presiding officer will then not allow you to vote because, in fact, they will give you one ballot because you do not qualify for the provincial ballot. And when you trickle that down to your local government elections, if you do not have a voter's roll, an address on the voter's roll, and present yourself at a voting station, but provide an address that perhaps falls outside that municipality, you would then not be allowed to vote, because you will not be able to get the ward, PR, and district ballots for that municipality. So this is an ongoing process, and we have a number of stakeholders that we are working with, especially traditional leaders and our chiefs, in ensuring that those who do not have addresses, we find them and address the voters' roll. As a province, we now have 2 municipalities where, when you look at the voters' roll, everyone in that voters' roll has some form of address, and that is EC 131, by Temba, as well as in Dabankulu in the eastern part of our province. Moving on from our voters' roll, we look at the civic duty of citizens. And as I mentioned earlier, that participation in elections actually strengthens our electoral democracy. However, we've noted as the Electoral Commission that voter participation and turnout does not entirely fall within our purview or our control, in that there are a number of other factors that are outside of the Electoral Commission that determine whether people vote or not. One can put it this way, that voting is more about the future than about the present. However, what happens in the present determines whether people would vote in the future or not. For instance, we have South Africans who would say, I don't want to vote because I don't see a difference. So that is the narrative that as we go out and do our voter education as the IEC, we try and influence in that by not participating, you are actually allowing other people to decide your future for you, especially young people. And therefore, we encourage young people to continuously participate. If you look at the turnout in the local government elections of 2021, you would note that the turnout in the country was just over 45%, and in the Eastern Cape, that turnout was plus minus 46%, which is an indication that participation generally in elections is on the decline. And on slide number 20, we have the turnout for the various regions within the province, with the highest turnout being at Sarah Baartman, interestingly enough. But then the challenge is that the slide 21 would deal with turnout, would give an age breakdown of the turnout, and we see that more females participate in elections than males. But the challenge with the decline in turnout is that we are now seeing another trend on the rise, and that trend is hung municipalities. After the local government elections of 2016 in the province, we had only one hung municipality. But after the local government elections in 2023, that number had increased to 3. That being Nelson Mandela, Yobogama, and Dr. Beas Mutie. And we are not alone in experiencing that trend as a province, because nationally we had plus minus 66 municipalities that we have. So when you look at those things, we need to work together in ensuring that we get people interested in the electoral processes. We encourage particularly young people to register and have them participate in making decisions on who will lead them or represent them in trying to carve out a future for themselves. Moving on, let's look at some of the key innovations that IEC is introducing for the 2024 elections. You would remember that prior to these elections that we are preparing for, if you were not at your voting station on voting day, but were able to prove that you are a registered voter and you belong on some segment of the voters' roll somewhere within the country, you would then be allowed to vote on condition that if you are within the province, you would be given 2 ballots, and if you are outside the province, you would only qualify for a national ballot. And we know that with most of the elections we've had, especially your national elections, you would always hear of reports in the media that there is a ballot paper shortage. And usually those reports stem from the fact that having made this provision to ensure that citizens are able to exercise their democratic right wherever they are, that provision has now been made, turned into an opportunity to shop for shorter queues. So voters, even within their own municipality or within their jurisdiction, a person would wake up, go to the community hall where they're supposed to vote on voting day, and find a long queue. And suddenly they would drive around Bishop or drive around King Williamstown and find a shorter queue somewhere and vote there via a Section 24. Perhaps even call other friends or family members to say there is a shorter queue at a particular voting station. And inadvertently, that voting station would run out of ballot papers because those people were not catered for in that voting station. So the Electoral Commission would like to ensure that citizens are still afforded an opportunity to participate in electoral processes, despite the fact that they are not at their place of residence or area where they are registered. However, a slight change to how the Section 24 process is now being introduced, in that there needs to be a pre-approval. So if you know that on voting day I will not be at my home, I'll be in PE, the Electoral Commission is now saying you need to apply and tell the Electoral Commission where you will be on voting day, so that we make provision for you there in terms of ballot papers. This, ladies and gentlemen, is almost similar to how we administer special votes, in that for those who are not able to present themselves at a voting station on voting day, there is a process where you can apply either to be visited or visit the voting station a day or 2 before to cast your vote. The Electoral Commission will also be looking at the voter management device that we use for elections, and we've enhanced the ability, the offline mapping abilities of that gadget to ensure that whether we are offline, online or offline, the gadget works as intended, and we are able to serve the citizens of this country. And also, I have already mentioned the fact that we've now introduced online voter registration, and citizens only need a cell phone to access that facility. You can access it from your laptop, your iPad, or your cell phone. It works similar to a banking app, where you will be requested to authenticate yourself. Once you've authenticated yourself, you will then go through a registration process, and then you will take a photo of your ID document. If you are still using the green barcoded ID, you will take the photo of the page where we have the barcode, the smart card, the front part of the smart card, or your valid temporary identification certificate, and then you will then be authenticated and approved or registered as a voter automatically. You'll receive an SMS confirming if when your registration is successful. Then in the back end, the Electoral Commission also looks at applications that the system was not able to approve. In some instances, when people take a photo of their ID, it will be blurry. There is a back-end process that we engage in to ensure that even those who have applied for registration in that manner, when we are not able to process their applications, they are informed and given a reason why the application is not approved, so that they have an opportunity to redo whatever they need to do to correct and ensure that they are registered. And then as I conclude, I want to say that in preparing for the elections, the Electoral Commission has had consultations with communities as well as via our municipal liaison committees. We've looked at the voting stations in our voting station network across the province. We've looked at settlements that require new voting stations. And proposals were made and sent to our national office around April this year. In 2021, the Eastern Cape had 4,809 voting stations. A further 76 new voting stations were proposed for the 2024 elections. 63 of those are already approved, and we are waiting for the finalization of that process by the end of May, which is today or later in the week. So if all the proposed voting stations are approved, we will go into the coming elections as a province with plus minus 4,885 voting stations. And currently we are also busy looking at the current network of voting stations. We know we've had a number of heavy rains and disasters in the province earlier in the year. So colleagues and our officials at local offices are actually going around looking at our voting station network and ensuring that we still have voting stations, so we need to have voting stations, and that we have the necessary infrastructure, that there is a road that leads to a voting station, that at the voting station there's water, there's ablution facilities, there's electricity, there's network, and so forth. We have to date managed to assess plus minus 736 of the 4,800 voting stations we have. And once we have onboarded our area managers in June, they will then assist us in ensuring that we vet and look at the balance of the voting stations we have. And Honorable Speaker, this is where we implore other departments, as envisaged in the Constitution, to work together with the Electoral Commission in ensuring that we have facilities where we can serve our people at local level. That we have schools, that we have venues, basically, that can be used as voting stations. I will not delve in the stakeholders that we will be engaging throughout the preparations for elections. Safe to say that we are now currently in our recruitment phase. And perhaps what is of interest there is just to mention, to look at of the people that we will be recruiting compared to LGE 2021, how did the IEC or the Electoral Commission fare? During LGE 2021, we had 6,400 male voting officers, and I'm referring to those people who assist us with administering electoral processes at voting stations. We had 21,948 female voting officers. Of the people that we used during elections, 25,000 of them were from the unemployed. 3,000 of them were employed, and 1,500 of those were teachers. There is this question that we are always asked as to why we use or why we employ teachers instead of the unemployed to manage our electoral processes. And the answer is, well, it's simple for us. I hope it's simple and makes sense to you as well. In that, firstly, the position of presiding officer, if you can see from the stats that I've mentioned, plus minus 85 to 90% of those we employ are from the ranks of the unemployed. But the role of a presiding officer requires someone, first of all, with a managerial experience. And secondly, of the voting stations that we use are schools. It then makes sense that that experience is sourced from people who, a teacher or someone from within that school, who will be able to also assist with the logistics of ensuring that we have access to that voting station in terms of keys and access. And secondly, as I conclude, when you look at that managerial experience, you will know that from those ranks, the people that we look at, we don't only look at teachers, but we look at people who are experienced. On election day, things get heated, and I think when citizens and members of various political parties visit our voting stations, and you find people who are efficient, then you know that IEC is actually serious about ensuring that this process is transparent and is managed in a manner that is free and fair. However, we've had incidents, for instance, one or two incidents, even in the province, where we had, some of our presiding officers who were quite inept and were fired on the spot. But I must also mention that this is where you find that we are taken to task for employing people without experience or an understanding of what they need to do. Honorable Speaker and Honorable Members, thank you for this opportunity. And that is the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Mosiane. You can do better than that, Honorable Members. Thank you so much. We will now allow an opportunity for questions or comments, not more than 30 minutes, Honourable Member, to engage the Independent Electoral Commission on this very, very important topic. Please don't tell them what they should be doing. It is for us to raise questions. I'm noting a few hands. Yes, can I start? The row where Honorable Makubela is starting, so it's number 1. Honorable Delanga, number 2. Honorable Damase, number 3. Honorable Saziwe, number 4. Honorable Twabo, number 5. Is it all the hands this side? May I move to this side? Honorable Malamela, only those 6. Coming down, no one. You're quite sure, Honorable. So those are the 6 hands that will be asking questions. Please, no preface, to the point. I think the presentation lends itself to be very direct and to focus us on seeking clarity questions or perhaps making certain suggestions. Over to you, Honorable Makubela.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. Greetings to you and the honorable members and our guests. My Honorable Speaker is in relation to their staff statistics, especially that Tony issue of employment of educators. I just want to check if their memorandum of understanding with the Department of Education in our province, is it still effective? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Madam Speaker. And welcome to the presentation. I realize that the emphasis is on the voter registration and the voter education is not emphasized on the presentation, but on the voter turnout. It's become clear that if one dig deeper, even on that low voter turnout, the question of the spoiled votes might also surprise us. Therefore, it's important that we also look at that. If there is a possibility. Or are there any plans for that? The second one is on the You said that there is a possibility that we can only have 2. But it's possible that we can have more than 2. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. When I speak about the Act, I will be referring to the Electoral Commission Act. The first one is, if we look at the objects of the Commission, it is to strengthen constitutional democracy. My question is in relation to the objects. Is to what extent is that worked against in relation to the voter turnout that we're seeing, which continues to be below 50%. That's one. And again, the Act envisages the following. The issue of the freeness and fairness of elections. To what extent is that impacted negatively in a situation where the voter turnout still falls below 50%? I have not looked at the research on what is happening to countries of a similar economic nature, but the fact of the matter is we have only participated in the democratic dispensation 9 years ago. And comparatively speaking, what does it say about the constitutional democracy wherein voters fall below 50% in terms of turning out in polling stations? Do you think, for instance, as we are enjoined by the Act that you must promote knowledge of sound and democratic electoral processes, is that not going against that in a situation where you are still faced with the situation that results to harm municipalities? And then the issue of the voter equation, between my last point. I know, for instance, that political parties have a responsibility to play there in the voter equation. Then looking at your budgets, starting backward from the elections of 2000, for instance, of 1999, to what extent have we not played our role as the Electoral Commission in terms of making sure that people are taught on the necessities of going to the polling stations? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. My question will be based on page 9. And what are you voting for in the national and provincial elections? Just 2 questions in that one. That is the IEC, or has the IEC already determined the registration fee for that candidate? Doesn't matter what to be an independent. How much will you require in terms of registration as an independent candidate? Secondly, will these candidates going to follow the same requirements as candidates from political parties in terms of them being fit, meeting all the expected standards? The second question relates to what appears on page 18, the responsibilities of the security of citizens. In fact, there you have reflected the previous voter turnout, if I'm correct, in terms of the 2021 local government elections. They are reflecting percentage. I would have loved that percentage was supposed to be juxtaposed with the number of citizens, population in that municipality. Firstly, was not able to follow the 45 out of how many in total, to how many registered and how many turned out on the voters on the voting days. The last one is just a concern that in terms of your recruitment process, we indicating that you are only going to use online applications. No, quite right that currently taking particular is one of those less developed provinces. Also the fact that currently this challenge of load shedding, because most of the time, if there's no electricity, you can't access some of those websites. Can you therefore then have a dual process in terms of that, recruitment time. Because if you might have that, but can't have data to access even that website. Thank you.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. My first question has been taken around the absence of emphasis on voter education. In fact, we seem to be hammering on this, noting the size of the ballot paper this time, now that there will also be independence in the ballot paper. The second one that I wanted to ask Chair was related to the voter turnout. Which elections have been used? Did you use the 2019 or the last one for local government elections? Or did you have any comparison between the two? Thank you, Honourable Speaker.
Thank you very much, Honourable Speaker. I'm not sure whether IEC will be able to deal with this one. I'm not sure if they were part of the Electoral Amendment Act. Yeah, but my question is there. You were saying the first 200 out of that 406, the first 200 is for political parties only. Then the other 200 is for political parties and independents. Now, why is it so? Are you not disadvantaging in a way the independents? I'm standing in for independence.
Why independent?
The second one is on the requirements that are needed for an independent register at the national level. I think you were saying plus minus 11,000 something. And also for province, I think you were saying 4,000. Now I want you to clarify me more. What criteria or method was used to say they must have this 11,000 plus. The method of that. Yeah. And the last one, I think, is from my honorable next to me, the Honorable Masindi. And has footsteps. She wants to understand that what is your program as IEC in terms of voter apathy? Because you are saying people, there's a decline for people that attend elections. Yeah. And the last one, about the democracy development. Because you are advocates of democracy. What is it that you are doing around that? Thank you very much, Honorable Speaker.
Thank you so much, Honorable Malamlela. I think you have adequately represented Honorable Gomba there. Mr. Masehane, you can come forward and respond to those. I know some of them are a mouthful, but I'm quite sure you'll be able to tackle all of them. And I can assure the House that this won't be the first and the last opportunity that we will call the IEC in front of us. As we are moving towards open voter registration in November, I think we should also seek an opportunity to just get to grips with a few things as we are moving. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. I must say before I respond that perhaps The reason why voter education does not feature that much in the presentation that was made is that based on the request or the invitation that we received, we were primarily looking at registration as well as voting trends. But that does not mean that the IEC is doing nothing in terms of the voter education. For instance, in the last financial year alone, with the staff that we have in our offices, and by staff I mean two or even one person representing or as an IEC official within a municipality, we were able to achieve 5,824 interventions throughout the province. And these are meetings where we went out into the community to meet with citizens, whether that event was organized by the Electoral Commission or organized by some of our stakeholders, and we were given an opportunity to present and encourage voters to register and participate. We continuously, I think annually, we have what we call, as part of our voter education and civics education programs, we have what we call a schools democracy week. And this is a week when we go out into the schools to speak to young people, help them understand their role in the democratic process, and also